Fest 2021 possible. And a special thanks to Book Bar, our official book selling partner this year. I'm going to introduce our first reader. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry has been published in Muzzle, Vinyl, Pen American, and various other journals. His essays in music criticism have been published in The Fader, Pitchfork, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in June 2016 from Button Poetry. It was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Prize and was nominated for a Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter 2017 by $2 Radio and was named a Book of the Year by BuzzFeed, Esquire, NPR, Oprah Magazine, Paste, CBC, the Los Angeles Review, Pitchfork, and the Chicago Tribune, among others. He released Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest with the University of Texas Press in February 2019. The book became a New York Times bestseller, was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, was released in 2019 by Tin House and won the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize. His newest release, A Little Devil in America, was published with Random House in 2021. He is a graduate of Beechcroft High School. Let's welcome Hanif.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. Yeah, my power went out earlier today, as those who were in my class know. And so I'm not in my normal reading space because the light's there, so I'm come on. There's power, but I think the light's shorted or something. So I'm on my couch, which means that my dog Wendy's here hanging out and snoring loudly. And hopefully she doesn't get too disrupted by my reading from here, which I don't normally do. But it's also a real pleasure to read with Layli, who is one of my favorite writers. And this is really thrilling. So I'm just going to read for about 10 minutes and then get out of the way. I'm going to read something from A Little Devil in America, 2 sections of a piece called 9 Considerations of Black People in Space. I'm going to read the first section and then the 4th section. 9 Considerations of Black People in Space. 1. To be fair, I cannot claim that I love the moon as much as all my pals and ancestors and peers. I maybe do not love the moon as much as other poets who seem to love the moon for what it is capable of doing to the waters or how it seduces the best or worst out of an astrological sign. I don't know much about astrology, but I do like the idea of astrology for what it brings out of my most creative and magically inclined friends. Alyssa, leaning eagerly over a table to ask me if I know the exact hour and minute of my birth so that we might do my natal chart and finally get down to the issue of what's going on with all my emotional rattling about. Madison, scrolling furiously through her phone over a dinner to see what phase the moon is in, or what planets are twirling ever more maniacally out of whack, so that she might explain to me why all the furniture in my heart's most precious corners has been overturned. Still, I can't say I'm much into what it all means, just that it means something, that we were all born under a different moon and a different sign, and I believe in it, I think. I have taken to waving a dismissive hand and telling a friend, that's such a Virgo thing to say, even when I'm not entirely sure what I mean, and no one has corrected me yet. So either I'm right, or I have surrounded myself with immensely kind people, which is probably a very Scorpio thing to say. And besides, Robert Hayden loved the moon. And what a fool I would be to not love what Robert Hayden loved, to not drink from whatever his palms offered. Robert Hayden so loved the moon that he decided to strip it of its magic entirely, so it was just the hanging and cratered glowing rock tasked with dividing up the darkness. And I too dig the moon most when it is a question of its functions. How, for example, I might have once slid underneath it in some alley on a clear night to better see the face of a dear brother, or to skim a phone number scrawled onto a napkin after spilling out of some dive. I wish to view the moon as Hayden viewed the moon, an object that has a purpose rooted primarily in how it shines, and little more beyond that. But still, I know that Black people in this country have long been obligated to a love for the moon, especially the enslaved who had to traverse the otherwise darkness in search for freedom, aligning directions with the way the moon fell and following the shapes of stars. And so, even if it is sometimes a bit of a show off, every now and again puffing itself wide, sometimes blushing a gentle gentle red, I do get the affection for the thing, even when it is dragging me out of the house, interrupting a romantic movie night, bending into the potential for more romance so that we can all go outside and stare. Then again, who am I to judge? I've picked through my own closet and opted for the crushed velvet or the bright red on a day where I am dressing for someone else's wedding. I've shown up to the high school reunion in sneakers that have cost more than I made in a week of work at a job, slinging books. So I suppose we're all the moon sometimes, depending on the occasion. While we're here, though, I have to say I also know nothing of the stars, but I've lied about what I know many times. On television once, a boy traced a constellation of freckles on a girl's face and then pointed at the sky, and she gasped with joy. On a walk in my real life, holding hands with someone somewhere, I pointed up at the stars and pretended to know the shapes of them and said something about the future, and the person I was with laughed. So, okay, I suppose I don't know the stars well enough to lie about them comfortably, but I did have a telescope once, bursting out of my top floor window during a time when I lived in a city that got less clogged with smoky haze during its nighttime hours, and I would look into it every now and then, searching for all the shapes that everyone else saw, but with no luck. From under a campfire, my friend Corinne said, "It's easy, the Big Dipper is right above us," and then she traced it out with her finger, but all I saw was a series of tiny explosions that never vanished, and I have to have some sympathy for the moon, for all the foolishness I projected onto it here, and all it is responsible for when it comes to making sense of the unexplainable human condition. But I also think about how lonely it must be up there among the darkness. Miss Zora, the truest of my ancestors, and the only light pouring onto all my unlit paths, says, "I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background," which is true sometimes on the train, and true sometimes at the birthday party, and true sometimes in the office meeting. But what then of the sharp and dark background holding up the waning and waxing white in all of its labor? What I feel is not sympathy, of course, a curious and thankful meditation, maybe, but still distance. 4. It is true that my beloved mother did not live long enough to go to space, and even if she'd had the opportunity, she likely wouldn't have made the trip. But she did have an afro, and on the days she'd get home from work and take off her hijab, she would sometimes pick her afro out and let it sit high for a whole evening, and from a distance, it looked like an entire black planet, and she'd sometimes sway in the kitchen and sing Miss Patti LaBelle, but it was never really the old Patti who in the early 60s toured through the Apollo Theater with Nona Hendrix and Sarah Dash in a group that would come to be called LaBelle once the labels got a hold of them. And LaBelle could sing, but that was only the half. And the other half was the look, which they didn't always have. When they first started, they fumbled through a series of wigs that didn't always match their heads and sometimes drooped down during their most energetic performances. In the early 70s, they dipped a toe into the UK and started wearing tight jeans and massive afros while cashing in on some of the more political soul music of the era. But in 1973, the group was spotted by designer Larry Legaspi. And I don't know when or where I first saw the video of LaBelle in those silver spacesuits. I want to say I first saw the clip of them singing Lady Marmalade on Soul Train, but it might have been the clip of them singing a song on Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special. Both of these performances took place a few years before I was born, but I do remember watching them on some old and creaking VHS with a label that had been written on and scratched out and then written on again. In the early 70s, Larry Legaspi had become convinced that fashion was going to be obsessed with a futuristic space-age look and that popular culture would follow. So, to get ahead of the curve, he began designing space deco outfits for musical acts, first of them being Kiss and then LaBelle. By the end of the 70s, the era of disco had taken some of Legaspi's influences, and the country had found itself newly infatuated with the cosmos, immersed in movies like Star Wars in 1977, and the first Star Trek film in 1979, which capitalized on the era's space craze after the original television series fell flat after 3 seasons in the 60s. Legaspi, it seemed, had been right all along. And under the watchful eye of Legaspi in the early 70s, each member of LaBelle had their own unique space look. Sarah Dash had a silver crop top with wide, rounded shoulders and silver shorts finished off with a pair of high silver platform heels. Nona Hendrix had a silver suit with an elongated diamond design dripping off the shoulder pads, stretching down to the pants. Patti herself wore a silver jacket with a massive, consuming collar and silver platform boots stretching almost all the way up to her waist. This wasn't their only untimely look, but it was their most memorable. On the nights they didn't take to the stage draped in their spacesuits, they did it drowning in massive feathers leaping out from every angle, from atop their heads or flaring out from their backs. Some nights they would mix the two aesthetics, accenting a space-themed top with bright, massive plumage. And in the most striking photo I recall, the trio is shot in black and white. Patty is in the center, flanked by Hendrix on her left and Dash on her right. The picture is from sometime in the mid-70s, after LaBelle had finally had their big breakout #1 song with Lady Marmalade, and their subsequent album Nightbirds became a hit. In the photo, Patty's hair, thick and wavy, rolls neatly along her head. The light in the photo makes her black hair glow. Nona's face is painted with a triangle of small dots starting at the top of her forehead and dancing down to her eyes, which are accented with eyeliner that sparkles even through the photo's lack of color. Sarah's ears are covered with feather-like jewelry. They are all wearing the half-smile, half-determined look that I've known the Black women in my life to wear before. It would be hard to know if they were smiling at all, if not for Patty's overabundantly defined cheekbones and Sarah's dimples, which I never needed much temptation to make an appearance. I found a framed version of this exact photo while antiquing once in a place where not many Black people traveled, and I assume even fewer Black people lived. And I am mostly assuming this because I couldn't imagine any other reason the photo lasted that long in the shop, especially for the price it was listed at, a paltry $2 when rung up on the loud and rattling register. I kept it on my desk in 3 homes. I realized that what I like most about the photo is how, in the moment, they do truly look like astronauts, like perhaps under each of their arms might have been a helmet. In videos of all their performances during the spacesuit era, I marvel, even now, at how smooth they made it all look. Wearing all that heavy silver, adorned in all those feathers, they still move the way they did in their jeans and black sweaters. And I think when you are young enough and impressionable enough, and you maybe don't know much about what rests beyond the stars, you imagine anyone can just go, including yourself, or including a music group of Black women who wore the costume well, including a person you love who sang along to songs by a member of that group from time to time and surely danced to that group in a time before you were born. I guess I have tricked you into reading about my mother again, and how I do not know if she wanted to go to space, but how I still wanted that for her. How, from time to time, I would catch her gazing at the stars. How, of course, I've held that old LaBelle photo close because it reminds me of the sky my mother might be occupying now, picking out her black afro until it blooms and blooms in endless dark. No one I love is immune to looking upward on a clear night. Within the vast and open possibility of darkness, though, I had hoped for a people to find a home, or at least a dream. LaBelle, grinning in the width of their spacesuits, singing songs about lonely and powerful women, songs about children going to space. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanif. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Our next reader is Layli Longsoldier. Layli Longsoldier holds a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts and an MFA from Bard College. Her poems have appeared in Poetry Magazine, the New York Times, the American Poet, the American Reader, the Kenyon Review, Online, Bomb, and elsewhere. She is the recipient of an NACF National Artist Fellowship, a Lannan Literary Fellowship, a Whiting Award, and was a finalist for the 2017 National Book Award. She's also received the 2018 Penn Jean Sign Award, the 2018 National Book Critics Circle Award, and the 2021 Academy of Arts and Letter Award for Literature. She is the author of Chromosomery and Whereas. She resides in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Layli Longsoldier.
Hello, good evening. I hope you can hear me. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm happy to be with you, Hanif. And I want to thank all of you for inviting us to share this evening together. I wish I could see all of you in person, but I'm still grateful that we can have this time even electronically. I was inspired by Hanif, your reading, and so I wanted to start off actually with a poem by Robert Hayden titled Full Moon, and I hope I can read it and do it justice. Full moon. No longer throne of a goddess to whom we pray. No longer the bubble house of childhood's tumbling mother goose man. The emphatic moon ascends, the brilliant challenger of rocket experts, the white hope of communications men. Some I love who are dead were watchers of the moon and knew its lore, planted seeds, trimmed their hair, pierced their ears for gold hoop earrings as it waxed or waned. It shines tonight upon their graves. And burned in the garden of Gethsemane, its light made holy by the dazzling tears with which it mingled, and spread its radiance on the exile's path of him who was the glorious one, its light made holy by his holiness, already a muted goal, and tomorrow perhaps an arm's base, a livid sector. The full moon dominates the dark. Thank you so much, Hanif, for your reading and for all that you bring to this evening. And again, that was a poem by Robert Hayden, not myself. Okay, I'm going to read some of my own work, and I'm going to do screen share because I actually, I like for everyone to be able to see the poems sometimes instead of just looking at me. Okay, this is a piece that I've been tinkering with for a while, and I hope you can see that. I'm assuming you can. And it's titled, I Am Different. I do not fear being alone anymore, any more than I fear the I in a poem. I still do not understand myself completely. And if viewed from the corner of the eye, that's thrilling. I am in a lifelong mystery under my ownership. It's mine. Yet no one, not even I, will witness its total unfolding. I've heard that the first words uttered as a sentence were, I am different. Is that true? And if it is, it must be true when the thinker says, in language, there are only differences. Sacred, gap, and recognition. Our distance from one another, a foundation for my I and yours for you. Difference becomes the singular word to define and the one word between us. And I'm aware, I know I am different when I ask, can you love the I in the poem as much as you love the poem? Okay, I'm gonna share one more piece. I feel so nervous this evening. I don't know why. And I'm here at home and I'm not even wearing shoes, which is something else. Okay, I'm gonna share one more piece. Excuse me. I hope this is the right one. Let's see if it works. Yes, this is it. This last year, I've been working on a series of pieces dedicated to missing and murdered Indigenous people. And I have read this piece a couple times over the last few months, but I'm constantly tinkering with it. And I wanted to share it this evening too, because we had quite a week in the Native community up north in Canada. I just wanted to honor all of the families and the communities who are feeling uh, the impact of unearthing the remains of 215 children at Kamloops Residential School, whom I also consider as part of our missing and murdered Indigenous people. It's something that has been ongoing. But I wrote this piece a few months ago, so I'll start with this. And I also wanted to read it because it's kind of a collaboration with my teenager and me. So I'm thinking of my kiddo. My student defined a river as a liminal space because it's a throughway. The current weaves between us as a prayer one could imagine. On each side of a river, a bank. Try stepping onto the bank in the mind's eye and take a breath. This side leads north, let's say, into a wooded area. Smell the tall pine. See the backside of a white-tailed deer flash between the trees. Look behind you to the south bank. That way leads to Shale Ridge, reflecting high noon light. There have been many stories about one river in particular, so large that a boat traveling along its center line is dwarfed in the river's width. And there's a story about one particular young woman found in its waters not long ago. I'm sorry. It's difficult. But before discussing the particulars of this team, how our hearts broke at her story, I linger at the river, where the bearded settlers put their paddles in, where they traveled masculine, one camp to another, where they charted and mapped, they panned for gold, where they led their soldiers down, where they detonated and built dams, mills, and refineries. Now they spew waste. Do you feel it as I do? The tone bristles when introducing these figures. In any case, this particular river crosses several national borders. That is to say, it crosses more than one national border besides US, Canadian, when we consider tribal nations. Though I know it's not necessary to discuss borders when we consider the land as living, is it? Rivers in the body are pathways of energy and nutrients, blood and water. A doctor of Chinese medicine speaks to me about these rivers, noting how a map of the body's rivers mirror waterways through our land. By the way, I had a accident, so I had to get some acupuncture. Anyway, I want to know more until she says, wait, I need to focus here, and puts her fingertips gently between vertebrae C4 and C5. It's sensitive when touched, yet it's a hurt so constant, I forget its presence. She inserts a needle into my skin to reconnect the rivers, the energy, and leaves the room for 20 minutes. Soft music, my breath, I'm alone. I lie there thinking. After the session, I curse at traffic on the drive home. So I assume this energy was necessarily released. From the river came my pent anger. When I return home to work on the page, I'm lost. If you're ready, I'll share something of the hurt. In 2014, that particular team was found in this river. They charged a settler man with her murder, though a verdict was reached of not guilty. The autopsy report noted the cause of the teen's death as unspecified. In other words, the cause was inconclusive. It could not be known, therefore, that she died of an unlawful act, the courts reasoned. So the man was free to resume his life untouched. It could not be known that she died of an unlawful act, I say again. Inconclusive when her body was found in that particular river, wrapped in a blanket and taped in plastic, weighed to the bottom by rocks. When we don't want trash in the house, we cinch up a plastic bag and tote it outside to a bin near the sidewalk, another liminal space. Someone else in a garbage truck will carry the garbage away at daybreak. Out of sight, out of mind, nearby, but not touching us. Trash is unuseful, unwanted, broken, or irreparable waste. There's much that we already know about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Yet, when we grieve, we are compelled to ask, why is the river used to dispose so many Native people, so numerous that a group of Inuit drag the bottom to search for bodies? Drop a paper wrapper into the water, watch it drift away from you, steady. Watch long enough, it rolls under, hidden from sight. To carry and wash, hide and absolve. A river does this for the human conscience. You and I are aware of who's considered disposable in this land. History is our evidence. But first, there's the mind. This particular kind of mind is capable of viewing a human as trash. Like you, I'm aware of whose minds those are too. History, evidence. And when I was a baby, my grandmother gave me a name that my father said translates into English as angel. As a child, I was unimpressed by this name, forgive me, because I associated it with the Christian version of angels, fantastical, floating pale figures. When I was older, I looked up the words of my baby name in a Lakota English dictionary and learned that my name meant something closer to girl who goes back and forth from the sacred. I took this to heart and understood myself instead as a person of liminality, which suited me better. This river inside me and all that it hides, where does it go? Like you, sister, answering this has become the lifelong pursuit. I actually had photographs of a project my teenager did that was in communication with this poem, but I'll share that for another time, save that for another time, so that we can have our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Layli. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that piece, especially the piece in work. Well, first off, I want to ask both of you, and our audience has put a few questions in the chat. And so the first one I wanted to ask, somebody asked about your process of revision. Layli, you were talking about you've written this, it's still you're still working through it. And so I was curious for both of you what your writing process looks like and then what your revision process looks like. So if you could share that with us, that would be great.
Well, all I can say is I'm a really slow writer. And I have to let my pieces sit for a long time because a lot of times when I write things, I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. It's what I want. It's what I'm feeling in the moment. And then of course it sits for a few weeks and I come back to it and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? So I spend a lot of time combing through, and part of my process is also time and just letting things rest and cool off for a while and then going back. So yeah, that's a big part of how I work.
Yeah, I mean, my writing process isn't that interesting. I mean, whenever I get asked questions about the writing process, I always feel like I'm letting people down because it really is unspectacular and not that interesting, and is sometimes driven by just a desire to articulate witnessing or what I have witnessed. So much of Little Devil in America is I saw something, or I found something, or I found a story of someone that excited me and I wanted to tell people about it. And to me, that's my process. But editing is interesting to me. Notoriously, like, I don't have any background I didn't study writing. I was awful at college anyway, and I didn't study writing in college, and I don't have an MFA. And the first time I did a writing workshop, the first time I went to like a writing workshop, I was like 20, I was 30, maybe over 30, 2015. And I couldn't believe that so much of the process was focused on these words like cutting or trimming or shrinking, when all the writing I knew, what excites me about writing is abundance. And so much of I just believe that editing for me has to be a generous practice. It has to be something I want to return to. I have to frame it that way in my head. I have to say, well, this is an opportunity for me to get a clearer and better idea of what this piece of work can become, but more importantly, what my thoughts and ideas and feelings around that work can become. And so I believe in editing abundantly. I don't throw anything away ever. If anything, it gets removed from a piece. I have a massive folder on my computer that I just keep every removal from, because there's pieces of essays in Little of Devil in America that are like literally were pulled from things I wrote in 2016. And so I think part of my practice is just imagining everything is useful, even if it isn't useful in that moment. And that helps me from feeling incapable, which it doesn't take much for me to do that.
I was going to say too, I think one of the ways that I view poems or anything that I make, I also work visually. So I make stuff. And I feel like those things, a poem included, I view it as having a particular life of its own. You know, it is its own being in a way. And so I think in revision, I try really hard not to interrupt or shift or change its original spirit, its original impulse. So that's very important to me. So I feel also, you know, I like the idea of abundance, and I also like for me, the way I work is taking care, being gentle with that work, with that piece. And so maybe that's why it takes me so much time, you know, and it's a little slower for me. But anyway, yeah, just putting that out there.
Thank you both for those answers. One question, I think, just as you were talking about that, it made me think about the two of you kind of read across forms, and I wanted to see what other contemporary authors or artists do you see your work being in conversation with? Whether that's like in reaction to, you know, their work or that conversation piece.
Fred Moden, Harmony Holiday. You know, I think it's interesting because poetry was never anything that I got into poetry because no one was paying me to write reviews anymore, and I figured I should try something new. But poetry was always kind of like a means to an end, where, you know, the reason I wasn't getting reviews anymore is because editors are saying, well, we can't run this because your language is too poetic and too meandering. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't study poems anywhere. And this is like 2012. And I wasn't deterred by that. I didn't say, well, I should change my writing. I just said, well, maybe I should figure out poems and figure out how to do this in a way that makes sense. And so I always think about, not even in conversation with, but, you know, the heroics of the first poets that I was pointed to. I is a big, I'm just such a big fan of I and Cruelty, the book Cruelty especially, which I was carried to because of Gabrielle Cavalcaresi's first book, The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, which is a book that I still keep on my nightstand because it's one of my favorite books of all time. And I was carried to that book because of Against Witch by Ross Gay, which I was carried to by Adrian Matika's Mixology. You know what I mean? Like, these were just books that I asked people, you know, when I decided I wanted to start writing poems, I just asked people, like, I don't know what to read, just tell me what to read. And I built this kind of lineage of writers I really love. Khadijah Queen is massively important to me. Khadijah Queen's work is, I mean, not in conversation with mine, but like, Khadijah Queen's work is someone that it's just massively, massively important to me.
Thank you, Hanif. Layli?
I think that for me, it always depends on in what way I'm working in many ways, it's like from piece to piece. There are maybe things that I'm thinking about or ways of working where I have to turn, it's like a big tree. There are many directions which I turn to depending on what I'm doing at the time. So it's not an easy question to answer, but I will answer it maybe in one way. So let's say a lot of my pieces do concern some of, like, whereas there are pieces that have to do with Native issues. I responded to the national apology. I wrote a piece titled 38 and so on. And so I think in that kind of work, I definitely turn to my literary ancestors and my peers. And I'm speaking about the Native community. And what I have found is so often our ancestors were writing about this very same things. I'm, for example, looking at some works by Zint Kala Shah, who's like one of the very first Dakota writers, Dakota women. It's the same issues of identity, issues of resistance, all kinds of things, and land and rights and so on. But I think a lot of times, the way I see it, it's our job to, like, in the moment, to refresh our approach, right? So it's heard again, and it's heard differently. If it didn't work the first time, if it didn't work the second, how can we build upon that and push it forward? And so, yeah, in that kind of work, that's what I think about. And also my peers are very important to me too. There's certain books I keep next to my laptop, and they kind of set the bar. I say, okay, this is what I need to be meeting. At least, yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to that one. And you were talking about the final piece that you read being kind of a collaborative piece with your daughter. Mm-hmm. And featuring her photographs. And for both of you, what role does collaboration and community play in your writing?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm so interested in, this is to say nothing of my peers who I had moved by in a lot of ways, but my most effective collaborations come through my reaching back towards the past in honor, like I think, Little Devil, I write extensively about Aretha's Amazing Grace documentary. And to spend time with that was to be in collaboration with it, to sink into it. Felt like to be in collaboration with it. And I think for me personally, to be in collaboration with history, in the telling of history, the telling of stories from history, is to kind of, particularly like of Black American cultural production, is to work against the American impulse to forget history that does not benefit the kind of the furthering of an empire's narrative, right? And so I feel like my most collaborative efforts are with ancestors, or are with the past, or with historical touchstones that I find myself happily sinking into.
I agree. I work in that way too. Like I said, I've recently, or in the last few years, I've been working on a set of pieces, collaborating with Zint Kala Shah, working with some of her stories and looking at the parts of speech. And through that process, I've recognized that a lot of the nouns, the verbs, the adverbs, if you strip away the particulars of the era, it's the same language we use today to talk about certain issues in our community. So that was really revealing to me, because I recognized it was a very clear, it was a stark way to see that the pain or internalized anger, like I mentioned in the in the poem I just read, that pent anger, it's nothing new. So and we were using a lot of the same language. But I do also collaborate a lot with community in the present day as well. And I'm actually giving a workshop tomorrow, or kind of presentation about some of those projects. Just because, and part of that is because my goal is always that I want to learn and a way of seeing myself as a learner. And so working with community and other artists, especially in the Native community, Lakota artists, Lakota language speakers, I think out of that process, I feel like I grow. And so that's really important to me too. Like I want to grow. I don't want to be like a art machine, you know, like
Mhm.
capitalism. Like people will invite you to do make all kinds of things and have deadlines. But if we're not careful, I'm going off on a tangent here, but if we're not careful, what happens is, like America, you know how they put the machine up to the cows and they just suck them dry? That can happen to you as a writer. It can happen as an artist, you know? And so I have been very intentional in, I don't want that. I don't want that kind of life, you know? I want to like work with people where I grow, they grow, we get something out of this, you know, together. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And just as, so as both of you were talking, it had me thinking, you know, you're talking about the past, and over the past year, America has, between COVID and protests following George Floyd's death, well, both of you wrote pieces about George Floyd's death specifically, and tying it to a broader social issues. And I wanted to just see if how the past year, what impact that's had on you in terms of how you approach writing and what you hope to accomplish with your writing.
Um, you know, I've been really careful about answering this because like hundreds of thousands of people, you know, like it have died. I just, to me, it like doesn't matter how it's impacted my writing. If I'm sure maybe it has in ways I can't really process or haven't really, but I think the scope of, I mean, folks who know my organizing work and mission know that I keep that work very separate from my creative work, because I think otherwise one might run the risk of thinking that the work is what they create and not what they do. And so in some ways, yeah, I mean, the impacts of the past year are far reaching and traumatic, and I just can't even process really what it's done for my writing, because that's not really that important. I mean, I'm still able to write, which is great. I have a lot of gratitude for that. And I'm still able to read happily, which is even more gratitude for that. I'm not, I have yet to become cynical about language, despite becoming cynical about a great many other things. And so I count that as a victory.
Thanks, Hanif. Layli?
I mean, I would agree with Hanif. You know, the last year was so hard. I actually didn't write much. In the last year, we had, you know, 6 members of our extended family who got COVID, including my father, and many things that we had. A neighbor died. I mean, it was like, it was just left and right, you know, it was a very difficult year. And so maybe there was a time when I felt maybe guilty for that I just couldn't write. I wasn't feeling very productive. And I thought, wow, I have all this time. But still, I think maybe the year showed me, like, who cares? Who cares? You know, and this is life, this is people, this is family, and it's about connection. So maybe if anything, it reinforced that that value of being connected to others, come what may, you know. And so, and even the piece that you referred to, and I wrote in response to George Floyd's murder. I just wrote that because I didn't know what else to do with myself. It was very emotional time. And I actually just put that as a Facebook post. I wasn't even publishing, you know, quote unquote, publishing it. But someone offered to publish it when they saw it, but I just posted it because I felt some, you know, I was feeling. So a lot of those concerns were about writing were secondary. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. We have time for one final question. And I was going to pull this one from, let's pull it from the audience Q&A. So this one is talking about when adding real life observations and experiences to your own writing, how much do you alter? And is altering the truth appropriate in your poems or in your writing?
I'll let Layli take that one first.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm trying to sort it out. Let me see.
Yeah. So when adding real life observations and experiences to your writing, how much do you alter? And this follow-up question is altering the truth appropriate?
I mean, I don't know, to some degree, I try to stay true to whatever it is that I have seen, observed, felt, or heard, because that is what brings me to the page, you know? I mean, usually there's some sort of glimmering of a truth or an understanding, or even not understanding a particular, you know, a burning question or confusion. But yeah, so when I come to the page, I try to be as true. I guess I do try to be really true to the observation or the experience as I can. Of course, you know, that, I mean, that's all relevant too, because it's always a matter of word choice, what words you're going to choose. And just the alteration of one or two words within a sentence can really shift the angle from which someone sees something or understands it, you know, when they're receiving it. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with Layli. I'll say that, like, sometimes through the widening of a truth or a widening of a history or a widening of experience, there are alterations that happen in ways that I don't think are nefarious. You know, by virtue of the memory being faulty, or by virtue of wanting to reach something that otherwise might not be there. So yeah.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate the two of you taking time to talk. Your readings were both amazing. And as a few folks have mentioned in the chat, Layli is teaching a craft class tomorrow afternoon on collaboration. Hanif's been teaching an advanced workshop this week, and Layli just did a weekend class. But I want to thank both of you for being so generous with your time and with your words and sharing them with us tonight.
This was a real pleasure, and Layli, it's always good to hear you.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you. And thanks for inviting us, having us together here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming tonight, and we hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.